You know that specific sterile silence that fills a boardroom when a $4,000 Herman Miller chair slides across a glass floor. It's not just furniture moving. It's the sound of a vacuum. A space being cleared for someone who thinks they're the future simply because they've never had to survive the past. I was standing at the back of the Innovation Hub at Sterling Global Logistics, holding a lukewarm cardboard cup of peppermint tea that tasted like mentholated disappointment and corporate apathy. I've been the director of operations and compliance for 22 years. That means I knew exactly which customs official in Singapore preferred single malt scotch over bourbon to expedite a clearance. I knew that the cooling system in Warehouse 4 would fail if the external humidity hit 92% because the seals were original from 1998. And I knew that our proprietary routing software, Ariadne, was currently holding together a $400 million supply chain with digital duct tape and custom lines of code I wrote during the 2008 crash. But apparently, I was legacy data. Tiffany Sterling, the founder's niece, didn't walk. She vibrated. She was 29, wore a white power suit that cost more than my first mortgage, and had a Chief Visionary Officer title that her uncle bestowed upon her after she spent 6 months finding her center in Bali. She smelled like expensive bergamot and the absolute, unshakable certainty that she was the smartest person in any room she graced with her presence. "Good morning, change makers," Tiffany chirped. She didn't use a podium. She stood in the center of the hub, using a $3,000 laser pointer to highlight words on the wall like synergy, agility, and hypergrowth. Her voice had that jagged, manic positivity that makes seasoned middle managers break out in hives. "Sterling Global is pivot ready," she announced. She wasn't looking at people. She was looking at a spreadsheet in her mind. "We are shedding the weight of the 20th century. We are moving to a fully AI-managed, cloud-integrated logistics model, which means—" She paused, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto me. "We no longer need institutional memory. We need algorithms. We need visionaries who aren't tethered to the way things used to be." I took a slow sip of my terrible tea. Shedding weight is corporate speak for firing the people who know where the bodies are buried and which wires are live. "Arthur," she said. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the high-end air purifiers. "Step forward, please." I didn't rush. I adjusted my $40 Casio watch. I smoothed the front of my charcoal blazer, sensible, durable, and completely invisible to people like Tiffany. I walked to the center of the circle. My sensible loafers made no noise compared to the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of her stilettos. "Everyone," Tiffany gestured to me like I was a fossil recently unearthed at a construction site. "This is what I'm talking about. The old guard. The operational anchor. But anchors don't help ships fly. Arthur has been managing our compliance since before high-speed internet was a standard. And frankly, we're moving the entire division to a boutique firm in Palo Alto. They're 40% cheaper, 100% younger, and they don't use filing cabinets." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Gary, the company's lead counsel, standing to Tiffany's left. Gary was a shark, but a cowardly one. He looked at his polished shoes. He knew this was a legal disaster, an age discrimination suit wrapped in a disruption bow. But he was too terrified of the new regime to speak up. "Do you want me to leave now?" I asked. My voice was steady. I don't scream. I calibrate. "Effective immediately," Tiffany said, checking her gold-plated smart ring. "Security will see you out. Leave your laptop. And please, Arthur, don't be analog about this. It's just business." I nodded slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't remind her of the Christmas I spent in the Dubai port because a shipment of life-saving medicine was stuck in a customs glitch. I simply reached into my worn leather satchel. "Very well," I said. "If I am no longer the director of operations, I suppose I shouldn't be holding on to these." I pulled out a small encrypted USB drive, the physical hardware key for the global customs portal. Along with it, a heavy brass ring with 3 old-school, jagged keys. Clink. I placed them on the glass table. "The master tokens," I said softly. "International port access, the hazardous materials bonding permits, and the manual override for the Ariadne engine." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Cute. We have the cloud passwords, Arthur. Keep your little antiques as a souvenir." But Gary, the lawyer, finally looked up. His eyes locked onto the small blue tag attached to the USB drive. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he'd been bleached. "Tiffany," Gary whispered. It was a strangled, terrified sound. "Tiffany, those aren't just tokens." "Hush, Gary!" Tiffany snapped. She waved a hand at security. "Get him out of here." I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. But as the glass doors slid shut, I saw Gary frantically grabbing the USB drive, his hand shaking, bringing it close to his face to read the tiny handwritten text on the tag. I knew what it said. I wrote it there 20 years ago. "Property of Vance Global Permitting, LLC." To understand why Gary looked like he was about to vomit a terrified lung onto the table, you have to understand the history of Sterling Global. Or rather, the history of its founder's incompetence. 22 years ago, when the company was a chaotic startup, Old Man Sterling, Tiffany's uncle, was a sales genius but a bureaucratic disaster. He treated tax law like a suggestion and viewed paperwork as a personal insult. When the company needed to expand internationally, they hit a wall. Sterling had a personal credit rating that was a smoking crater due to a failed casino venture, and the company couldn't secure the necessary hazardous materials bonds or international port licenses required to move heavy freight. I was a junior manager back then. I sat in a meeting where Sterling was throwing a tantrum because the port authority wouldn't grant him a permit without a massive cash deposit he didn't have. "I don't care how you do it," Sterling had shouted. "Just get the permits. Set up a shell. Set up a trust. I don't care. I just need to move the cargo." That was the moment. The golden ticket. I proposed a strategic permitting entity. I created an LLC called Vance Global Permitting. I put up my own flawless credit and a significant inheritance as collateral to secure the bonds. I told Sterling that this entity would hold the licenses and lease the usage rights back to Sterling Global for a nominal fee. This kept the liability off Sterling's books. Sterling didn't even read the proposal. He just heard improved debt ratio and I don't have to sign the bond. He signed the authorization form while eating a turkey sandwich. Here is the detail that slipped through the cracks. Vance Global Permitting wasn't a subsidiary of Sterling Global. It was mine, fully disclosed on page 84 of the corporate charter. The licenses were tied specifically to the authorized oversight of myself. For 2 decades, Sterling Global owned the trucks and the ships, but I owned the permission for those trucks and ships to cross borders. I was the landlord of their entire global supply chain, and they were just the tenants who forgot to check who they were paying rent to. 2 days after my dramatic exit, I was sitting in my backyard in Virginia. My house is a modest, well-kept mid-century modern. I was deadheading my roses, wearing gardening gloves, when my phone started vibrating. Then it started screaming. I ignored it. I watched a blue jay land on the bird feeder. I checked the screen. 14 missed calls from Gary, 8 from Tiffany, 3 from the Port of Long Beach. I walked into my kitchen and opened my personal laptop. I didn't need the corporate VPN. I logged into the Vance Global portal. When Tiffany fired me, she technically terminated the liaison agreement required by the port authorities. In the eyes of the law, Sterling Global no longer had a valid representative to manage hazardous materials. I clicked on the Status tab. Port of Singapore. Access suspended. Rotterdam Customs. Bond forfeited. Ariadne routing engine. Emergency lockout. See the AI-managed cloud? Tiffany Loved So Much was built on the backbone of the licenses I owned. When the authorized representative, me, was removed from the system, the security protocols assumed the company had been liquidated. It didn't just stop working, it encrypted the entire logistics database to protect the assets. I wasn't in the office, but I know exactly what happened because the banker sitting across from Tiffany, a man named Marcus from Deutsche Bank, is a man I've played golf with for a decade. Tiffany had called a meeting to secure a $50 million innovation loan. She wanted to use the company's international licenses as collateral. "Miss Sterling," Marcus had said, adjusting his spectacles, "you want to leverage the global port permits for this loan." "Exactly," Tiffany said, fanning herself with a folder because the AC in the building had defaulted to energy save mode, 82 degrees, the moment my corporate credit card, the one that paid the utility vendor, was cancelled. "They are our most valuable intangible assets." Marcus tapped his iPad. He frowned. "Miss Sterling, there's a problem. Sterling Global doesn't own these permits." Tiffany laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. We've used them for 20 years.
"You've leased them," Marcus said, turning the iPad to face her. "The deeds and bonds are held by Vance Global Permitting, and according to the filing, those rights are non-transferable without the express consent of the owner, one Arthur Vance. Since you fired him 2 days ago, the licenses have technically defaulted." The silence that followed must have been exquisite. The realization hitting her like a wet fish. She had fired her own landlord. I was finishing my lemonade when a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Gary and Tiffany stepped out. Tiffany looked different. Her power suit was wrinkled, and she was sweating, partly from the humidity, partly from the fact that $200 million worth of cargo was currently sitting in the Pacific Ocean with nowhere to go. "Arthur," Gary said, his voice cracking, "the ships, they're being turned away. The Port of Singapore is threatening a $50,000 per hour fine for blocking the lane. We need you to sign the transfer papers." I looked at Tiffany. She wasn't chirping. She was looking at my modest house, realizing that the analog man she mocked was the only reason her company still existed. "Transfer?" I asked mildly. "I thought you wanted agility. I thought you didn't need institutional memory." "We'll pay you," Tiffany whispered. "A consulting fee. Just name it." I smiled. The new lease agreement for the permits is already in Gary's inbox. It includes a 400% increase in the usage fee, a permanent seat on the board for me to ensure compliance, and the immediate resignation of the Chief Visionary Officer for gross negligence of core infrastructure. I stood up and picked up my pruning shears. "Oh, and Tiffany, if you want to talk about pivoting, you might want to start with your career. I hear those Palo Alto firms are looking for visionaries, because right now, the only thing Sterling Global is disrupting is its own bankruptcy filing." I went back to my roses. I had all the time in the world. They had exactly 4 hours before the next tide came in, and with it, the largest fine in the company's history. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was just a rhythmic, sharp clack, clack, clack. The sound of the old guard locking the door on the way out.